Welcome everybody to the new episode of the Super Story Vidcast. It's going to be a super special episode, no pun intended, because we are joined today by Mr. Jeff Gomez. I know him as a transmedia guru. You may know him from such projects: Men in Black, Avatar, Halo, Pirates of the Caribbean, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He's done a zillion things that are all wildly interesting to nerds like me and millions of other people. Widely respected guy in the industry, and super happy to have you on the show today. Thanks for coming on, Jeff.
Thank you, Houston. This is great to be here.
Very cool. Very cool. My first question has to do with just how you've been making it through quarantine. How has that been for you? Because I know you're based in New York. Just what's it been like?
Well, geez, Houston, you're starting on a bummer.
Yeah.
Guys, this is it is the single most difficult challenge I think that we have faced as a city. And certainly, personally, for me, it is way up there in terms of how difficult this has been, and how deeply sad it's been. There's enormous tragedy. I live in the heart of the city. I'm in Chelsea, Manhattan. We are adjacent to. My co-op is adjacent to projects buildings, so we see what's going on with people who have less than us every day. There are a number of services in the area that are trying to assist the homeless and people who have hunger issues. And that's wonderful, but also it's extraordinarily tense because people are angry. And people who live at the lowest rungs in this city are used to people being around to kind of assist them, and they're not here, and that creates a real edge here. So, on top of all of that, I'm trying to hold the company together, a
Sure.
production company that's involved in several different kinds of projects, some of which are kind of spinning, and so it's tricky.
Yeah, you were talking about holding projects together, and that's a really interesting subject in this time that we're in. I see that you have been able to develop and be involved in some new cool projects coming up. How did that develop before COVID-19, or has your phone been ringing, or have you been reaching out to people during this time and making any headway?
Guys, this is actually the 20th anniversary of Starlight Runner.
Oh, wow.
So you're talking to me on our birthday.
Oh,
20
congratulations.
years.
Happy birthday.
And one of the wonderful things about being around this long is that if someone needs something kind of new and strange, they've always known to come to us, and new and strange is necessary right now. So it's actually in that respect a kind of exciting time. There were a number of projects that we were involved with, for example, that had to do with immersive experiences, like installations and things like that. Now, some of them are coming to us and saying, is there a possibility to bring that immersive experience online somehow? Interactive theater was going to be done in theaters. Now, is it possible somehow for that to happen through a kind of Zoom-like interface? We've been pursuing audio, as in podcasting and audio drama, and of course that is booming right now. It's becoming a multi-billion-dollar kind of media platform, and it's accelerating. because of the hunger for new content. So there have been some interesting opportunities and some interesting ways to apply our collective imagination.
Yeah, I'll say it's interesting how, the entertainment industry, there's always been innovations that have kind of been birthed out of different needs and things like that. And, we see how companies like Twitter are taking advantage of this, and they're like, oh, we're just going to work from home from now on, like we can change the way we're doing things, and you've been developing content and ways that fans are interacting with content for a long time. How have you kind of seen how progressions in the industry has kind of moved our interaction around, especially with the internet coming along a couple decades back with social media? And how's your experience with fans kind of changed as you're developing over time based on the development of technology?
When I was growing up as a kid, I loved Godzilla movies and the kind of serious animation that was coming out of Japan. And in the mid 1970s, I had the opportunity to live in Hawaii, which was much closer to Japan and received a lot more content. And what was so fascinating about the way that the Japanese did things, this is even back in the 1970s, was they seemed to understand that if you loved their characters and their storylines, the worlds that were depicted in these anime or even these live action kind of kid vid science fiction series, they'll give you more. They'll offer you more. So their comics were different from their TV shows, and they would get you the record album of the music of the show. And they'd give you magazines filled with all kinds of information about the characters and so forth. There was a media mix, as they put it back then, that was actually honestly respectful of fans. This wasn't taking a cheap decal, and putting it on a T-shirt and saying, "There you go, now you're a fan." This was about immersing you in the world, giving you more of the stuff you love, and that sincerity and that seriousness was something that really, really took hold of me and has informed everything that I've done. If you like the content that I'm working on, I want to make sure that your every encounter with that content or aspects of that story world is respectful, both of the story world and of your time and your money. That was not the licensing and manufacturing model. That wasn't the media extension model. When you loved Star Wars, you were stuck with droids on cartoon shows and television, or the Ewok adventure, and that was not living up to the standards of Star Wars. Look how the world has changed, and in some tiny way, I'm hoping that I had made those kinds of contributions to the thinking of these big companies to take these properties seriously, and as a way to cultivate very, very loyal and ardent fans.
I was a big He-Man fan when I was a kid, and I loved the Saturday morning cartoons, and then when you would buy the action figure, you would get the comic book with the action figure that would give you sort of a tailored story for that action figure. And I loved that. And I thought it was a tremendous experience until I started to realize there were continuity issues between the comic book and the cartoon. And I remember as like 10-year-old Houston, that was like wildly frustrating for me, because I remember specifically I got Ram Man. And Ram Man, there was a story in the comic book with Ram Man where he was at odds with Man at Arms, and they were both good guys, and it was like a devastating thing for me that these two good guys were feuding. But then I remember anticipating the Saturday morning cartoon, and when I watched it, it was as if that never happened. And that was a wildly frustrating thing for me as a kid. And I didn't really understand why that was. Now, as an adult in the industry, I understand sort of the business model of it and why, the difficulties of coordinating that creative. But I remember from a fan perspective, wildly frustrating. Do you see the business model of multi-platform entertainment changing to be able to accommodate continuity?
100%. It's something that I have been an advocate of since entering into the formal entertainment industry. When we worked on video games and comic books at Valiant and Acclaim Entertainment in the 90s, I pushed so hard for there to be a kind of continuity in between these different media. Both comic books and video games, as well as the web. And that was enormously difficult to do because there was just no incentive for anybody to care about it. And there wasn't any thought put to it. And certainly they weren't going to spend money working with writers that they were paying on the comic books to actually write the dialogue in the video game and things like that. I actually kind of had to sneak and do it myself. I worked on Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering was a trading card game, still is to this day. It's an evergreen brand. But back then, I wanted the comic books to describe the world of Dominaria, the world depicted in the cards. And that was fine. Wizards of the Coast liked that idea. But my own company was not terribly incentivized to build a website filled with the lore and the various things that I couldn't squeeze into the comic books or the Magic video game, and I had an intern put together the website and for free, and the damn thing crashed from so much interest. And that began to kind of prove the point that fans were actually interested in the lore and in the continuity of these story worlds. And that's the ethos that I brought to the work that we did with the Walt Disney Company and with 20th Century Fox and Sony Pictures. The fact that fans could respect this sort of thing. But there were a lot of challenges along the way.
What has been the most rewarding thing that you've worked on in your career?
Wow.
Yeah, big question. I'm curious though. You've worked on so much.
Sure. There are three different kinds of things that were just stunning and wonderful. And they continue to deliver those rewards after all these years. Being able to write my own comic books and be paid for the first time the kinds of money that I couldn't have imagined as a kid for the Magic the Gathering stuff, and build that story world, have my own intellectual property become a multi-platform story world was a dream come true. So Magic the Gathering was just awesome. And my name was on it and all
awesome.
That sort of thing. It's cool. The second time that happened was with Mattel and the Hot Wheels brand, working on Hot Wheels World Race and Highway 35 and all the spin-offs and sequels and prequels and sequels that entailed. And that was not as rewarding at the time, but 20 years later, it's the number one fan response that I get today. Emails, posts on social media, and so forth, because those kids grew up and are coming to thank me and Starlight Runner for creating this thing that was like filled their childhood.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that is truly awesome. But the big the number three, and certainly the one that had the greatest impact on my career, was Avatar. Working with James Cameron and John Landau, with my team on the set of Avatar, and having that level of interaction, influence, and support from that production was just fantastic, and our Starlight Runner took off like a gunshot after that.
Fantastic.
A question for all of you guys, or for all of us to think about with fan communities. Speaking of Avatar, I really loved the movie Avatar. Big fan of it. I love the story. I love the cinematography. Just the whole of it, was just really intriguing to me. But I don't see and maybe I'm wrong on this, the fan community being as strong as the Trekkies, the Star Wars guys who line up 3 days in advance outside, and and I'm not disrespecting that, right? So I'm wondering, with all of us thinking about what are those components? Is there a formula? Is there something that you do, Jeff, every time to have at least the opportunity or the potential to create a fandom like some of the other ones that are bigger than Avatar, even though Avatar was this big cinematic creation? I hope that question makes sense to you guys.
Oh, sure. And guess what? We're going to talk dirt. Because Avatar doesn't belong to 20th Century Fox anymore. Avatar belongs to Disney. So I can speak ill of the past. When we read the screenplay, the draft screenplay to Avatar, and then began to explore the pre-production materials during the initial phase, where we absorb brand essence, where we absorb the core messaging of the story world, so that we can help with the transmedia. We became concerned that not enough was being done to set the stage for fandom. We were absolutely convinced that this was going to be huge, that Avatar was going to hit. It contained all of the archetypes and aspirational drivers that would rivet people, and the visuals and so forth were just going to be fabulous. So it was a part of our transmedia strategy with 20th Century Fox to cultivate fans. And the way that you do in the run-up to a major motion picture, a movie that we believed would earn hundreds of millions of dollars, if not break $1 billion, we even underestimated that, was to set the stage philosophically. Avatar has a core system of wisdom, as does Star Wars, as does the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as does the Harry Potter universe, and that ethos, that system of wisdom, needed to be prepared and woven into every aspect of the communication of the brand, the communication of the story world, and frankly, that was going to cost a little money. A tiny fraction, somebody's lunch compared to everything else that was being spent on the property. But unfortunately, the powers that be at 20th Century Fox said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to communicate in a transmedia fashion what the essence of the story is about. It just was not interesting to them. And it was going to be difficult to do it because, of course, James Cameron did not want to give away any details of the story and so forth beforehand. But even still, we had, I thought, what would be an airtight plan to indoctrinate fans, and then to support fans after the movie was done. And this was the most critical error, I think, that 20th Century Fox made. And this was despite requests from James Cameron and John Landau. They wanted for fans to have something to hold on to after the movie was finished. And there were just, the studio felt that they had spent enough money and they were not going to spend a penny more. And so the cultivation, validation, and celebration of the fans was just not a part of the formula, and that was enormously frustrating for all of us. And it's truly one of the reasons, one of the two big reasons why Avatar did not have a larger cultural footprint. The other reason was that I felt that the interactive campaign, the video games were not done well enough.
Right.
They should have been better, and had they have been better, the franchise could have supported itself on video game consoles for quite some time.
Sure.
Yeah, I imagine. I'm thinking about the possibilities with Avatar, with how well it did. And if we could have continued in, like you said, you have this thing that you've mentioned twice as respecting the fans and starting with that. That does something right there. Because if you carry Avatar into the now, I can picture the fans. I mean, I know I'd want to create your own emoji, Bitmoji, whatever. How do you look in an avatar and having that interaction on social media? I mean, think about the things that are developed. If you would have respected that fan base in the beginning and put all of those things in place, tons of potential just by respecting the fans first.
Well, do you think
going back to the 70s?
Do you think that Disney will do it differently? I mean, do you think that Disney, with what they understand from Star Wars and Marvel, now under the Disney banner, do you think the next wave of Avatar films will have a different approach or a different strategy that goes along with it?
There's no question about it. They will, and my hope, however, is that Disney will have learned some lessons in terms of dealing with fans from the bumps in the road with Star Wars.
Sure.
You have to. It's funny. 10 years ago or so, there was simply just very little regard for fans.
Right.
Fans were nerds. They comprised a very small portion of your potential audience, and they really didn't have that big a voice, which, of course, the entire opposite is going on today. So now, instead of ignoring them, fans are a group that some companies actually fear. If you piss off the fans, it doesn't take very many of them to make trouble for you.
Yep.
And so that atmosphere of antagonism, which, believe me, fans can be antagonistic. I first started seeing fan antagonism in the early 1990s on comic book bulletin boards.
Oh, wow. Yep.
They used to write letters to Valiant Comics, and I used to be the guy who opened up the letters and edited them and assigned them to the comic books, and most of them were pretty sweet. Some complaints here and there, but they were fans. They loved these characters and so forth. On those boards, through America Online and so forth, with the veneer of anonymity, right?
Sure.
You could say anything you wanted, and suddenly it was getting kind of extreme, and I was shocked. I thought, wow, I thought we loved this stuff. Now here you are saying these terrible things about my comic book, and of course that was the seed for the kind of extreme culture that we are seeing, the polarized culture that we're seeing today.
Sure.
The key, by the way, in addressing that sort of thing, which I learned back then, was that all they really want to be is heard,
Right.
Listening to fans, acknowledging them, being able to take the guff, which is not personal, it's just them venting, and addressing what you can discern as their actual concerns underneath all the bluster.
Sure.
Was something that allowed for me to develop fan bases for the projects that I worked on, because I was communicating directly with fans through email and AOL posts and things like that. And that was very difficult to get my bosses and ultimately my clients when I was at Starlight Runner. It was hard to get them to understand the power of that and the positive underpinning of that kind of activity.
Wow.
No, I thought it was interesting. You mentioned kind of in your triage phase of Avatar, kind of assessing what you had there and kind of that there's a formula to it, and I remember when we first started finding out about you, when we were developing our transmedia process, and we were reading, hey, look at this guy, he's selling these mythology books to the to the studios for their properties. Like, wow, so there's a deliverable here, because we were trying to figure out how we developing our stuff. That was back when we were going to board game conventions, and we had this board game Fury. It was this multi-platform like fighter game, and we were getting a lot of good responses. And then people were saying, "Hey, you guys should turn this into a movie," And so we were in the process of writing a script, and actually, the Fox executive that was developing with us was on a couple shows back. And at that time, we were developing. Okay, what's our deliverable look like to these guys? And so we were taking some inspiration from what you were doing back then.
Fantastic.
And so, how are you when you're building in consideration for the fans and how to really give them what they want? What's that process look like, and how do you flesh all that out to make sure you're accommodating everything?
I would say the first 10 years of Starlight Runner were teaching years, in so far as the concentration on the mythology document.
Sure.
Was a big deal for us, because what we were really telling these big studios was respect your own intellectual property.
Yeah.
Put it in a beautiful book, a tome, right, with leather on the cover and full color photographs, and every single character, location, and creature should be, thoroughly described in there, and the entire chronology of your universe should be listed in there. Why? Because we want you to take ownership of the thing that you own, right? You're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on this intellectual property. Why would you call in essentially a freelance work for hire dude to come and take that precious
Sure.
billion-dollar property and do whatever the hell he thinks he wants to do with it?
Yeah.
Right? This is my take on your property. I have every respect for brilliant directors and writers. We can't move without them. However, I, as the owner of this property, am obliged to understand fundamentally what works and what defines this property, what the essential ethos of this property is, the wisdom of this property. Who is Jack Sparrow? If you come here and tell me Jack Sparrow is a pirate in the traditional sense of a pirate, meaning he is bloodthirsty and he slits the throats of innocent people and he rapes and pillages, I will tell you, please see your way to the door.
Yeah.
Right? I don't want you to damage my brand. And yet, when we worked on Pirates of the Caribbean, there were people, there was talent in places around the world creating content where Jack behaved that way. And we have to say, despite the fact that we have deep respect for that creator, we have to say, listen, there's a document here that tells you who this character genuinely is, and he's not that.
Right.
So unless you give us an extraordinary explanation for how he's changed to become that temporarily,
Yeah.
you have to stop. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, in fact, if there's any little gift we left behind with the Walt Disney Company, it was the notion of centralizing the story world, not the screenplay, not the movie,
right.
but the story world had to be centralized and placed above the interests of any individual at the company. We serve these mythologies, right?
Yeah.
And this document is a memoriam to that service. This is what it is. I will come back and update that damn thing every year if you need me to.
Right.
But we are in service to these mythologies, and Disney has taken that to heart, and that's where you get the Marvel Cinematic Universe, not just in the terms of the vision of Kevin Feige, but in the terms of how the company has morphed itself to leverage the intellectual property across all of its divisions and all media platforms.
Sure.
It's awesome. We've also been kind of reading about how lately you've been honing in on the Joseph Campbell hero's journey, collective journey stuff. So how's that informing kind of your process and how you're changing it now these years later?
Well, it's really interesting. When I was young, and I would see these kind of enjoy these epic Japanese anime and these big fantasy novels and movies, science fiction movies. You have to remember that I was brought up in a tough neighborhood. There was a lot of fighting going on. Violence was something that was kind of a reality for me and for the people that surrounded me, and so I knew what that felt like. I knew that what it was that I was reading about was actually deeply unpleasant and not desirable. So I always wished that there was another way. Could these conflicts in these stories be resolved in ways that somehow were not ultimately about murdering the bad guy, right?
Sure.
It was something that I'd always toyed with somehow over the years, and it was difficult, of course, because we're trained as storytellers to introduce conflict that's was polarized, that smashed against each other until somebody won, or someone was clever enough to become the dominant factor, the hero, and so it was hard. So the thing that that kind of started snapping me out of it was actually at the Disney theme parks, when we were looking at them and thinking about ways for people to enjoy the parks in different ways. I love the idea of role play. I love the idea of going into the park and not kind of leaning back and having fun with these rides and attractions, but to actually be, I don't know, like a character in the park, and that the park was a world, an extension of the story world of the intellectual property that I loved so much. And we saw this a little bit with the Pandora, the World of Avatar attraction, which we did a little consultation on. And I began to talk with the Disney Parks and Resorts people about the idea of Star Wars being a piece of the Star Wars universe, just kind of landed in the park, and we'd be able to visit it and have fun there. Now the trick there is you don't want people to run around shooting each other or clobbering each other with plastic lightsabers. So how do you tell a story that involves hundreds or thousands of people and is nonviolent, and still is thrilling and interesting and individualized? And that helped to galvanize my thinking about a story world that's really systemic, a system with flaws in it, and we as characters represent different aspects of that system, and our job is to somehow reconcile so that the system can be repaired. Because if the system's not repaired, it can start to hurt a lot of people. We can be damaged by it. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that became the model of collective journey. The idea that, yeah, we could still have conflicts, but ultimately we are going to have to start juxtaposing our thinking on with one another in order to come up with solutions that will ultimately benefit most of the people. And then we started to see that systemic storytelling in Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
In Orange is the New Black, in the movie Arrival. It just was starting to pop up everywhere. And also, of course, we started to see it in real life. The systemic story, the mega stories that were unfolding on social media, that were resulting in movements like Black Lives Matter, or the Me Too movement. There were no individual heroes there. There were just people who had something to say, step forward to say it, and then kind of step back and let the flow of narrative manifest into reality. And that was really, really fascinating. And this is what I've been writing about for the past few years: collective journey storytelling.
Yeah, I think your work on collective journey is really super interesting. I mean, so I teach transmedia design and transmedia storytelling at the Los Angeles Film School and the Art Center of Design in Pasadena, and your 2010, I believe it's 2010 TED Talk is always sort of a required viewing of the students in those classes.
Thank you.
And the big takeaway from that one, I think it's really interesting how you explain transmedia sort of through your life story and your origin story. But one of the big takeaways is just how what a deep dude you are. Like you're like this interesting transmedia philosopher, right? And the students always remark about sort of the deep thinking behind it. But the part of the video that they love, the part of the talk they love is the part at the end when you talk about sort of the social responsibility when it comes to these models. And they always respond to that in a really interesting way. And I think that, that lends itself into what your current thinking of what you're doing with the collective journey. And so I've over the years I've been reading your blog and some hearing your interviews about the collective journey, and I think it's interesting how you talk about the sophistication of the audience changing to where sort of the very basic moralistic stories of good versus evil, they're starting to give way into a little bit more nuanced perspectives, right? And we've seen that in media before, to where the Vietnam movies of John Wayne, where and all the Vietnamese were all a very certain way, and they were all the bad and it was not nuanced at all. That gave way to more nuanced thinking, such as Apocalypse Now and things like that, right?
Correct. Sure.
So you start to see culture changing and the sophistication of the audience change along with that. And so one of the things that so I chose a Star Wars background. I'm a big Star Wars fan, and one of the most interesting things that I see is in fan culture and in fan communities. One, I think that the Star Wars fan community is one right now just very, I don't want to say toxic, but maybe that's it's not a super happy place, right? At least on Twitter, it's not. And because it's as if Rian Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy threw a grenade into fan culture with The Last Jedi, and I for to the consternation of the people I talk to usually in everyday life, I love The Last Jedi. I think The Last Jedi is a masterpiece, and one of the things I love about it is sort of the interesting nuance of Kylo Ren, and I feel like that Kathleen Kennedy and Rian Johnson really tried to push Star Wars forward into a more nuanced storytelling mode, but the fans, or at least a large sect of the fans, really kind of rejected that. They didn't like the interesting nuanced approach to Luke Skywalker. They wanted him to be the video game hero, right? And they wanted Kylo Ren to be the video game bad guy. And it seems like there's still a part of fandom that likes the basic. And as a storyteller myself and as a fan, I like the nuance, but it seems like they're still holding on to that moralistic good versus evil approach. What do you think about The Last Jedi?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
I wrote about this as an adjunct to my Collective Journey blog. I called it the Deconstruction of Star Wars. I think that with enormous respect to Lucasfilm and the work of Kathleen Kennedy, there was a mistake made, and the mistake is not the obvious one. The mistake was that I believe that Kennedy was an auteurist.
Mm-hmm.
She believed in the power of the director.
Right.
And what she did was she said, well, here is this fabulous intellectual property. Everyone who's anyone would dream of telling their story within the context of this intellectual property. So have at it. And what happened was that Star Wars was parsed out, not just to Abrams and Johnson, but to Trevorrow and Josh Trank and all these people, the guys Miller and Lord who were on Solo, and they were all, of course, spinning their own take on Star Wars, and while I think there's obviously room for that. And we see stylistic flourishes and individuation in the Marvel movies. If you don't have that fundamental mythology, if you have not worked out your arc, particularly in a trilogy in advance, you're going to run into trouble.
Right.
So the shock of The Last Jedi did not emerge, I believe, out of the single film. It emerged out of how disjointed it was from the first film. The first film gave us no preparation for what would happen in the second film. The second film did not have any particular concern for the first film.
Sure.
What Johnson had to say was breathtaking and truly actually a shift from hero's journey to collective journey mentality
100%.
in many respects. Um, but it was done in a vacuum.
Mm.
So if that's the case, okay. Even at that juncture, here I am at Lucasfilm going, wow, this movie's kind of a kick in the nuts.
Yeah, sure.
Fans could perceive this as a subversion of all the things that they love. So then the conversation would be, if Starlight Runner were at the table, the conversation would be, let's start a conversation about this with those fans, with the fans who are going to react strongly. We saw hints of those fans with regard to Rey and the depiction of Rey in the first film, so we know they're there.
Yeah.
How do we address those fans and make them feel heard and make them feel prepared for what it is that they're going to see? And of course, not only was that not done, what happened was that there was overt antagonism.
You're right.
So you're deplorables.
Yep.
You fans suck, and you're in the tiny minority. And go away.
Yeah.
Star Wars is not for you. That was what they felt. Whether or not it was meant by Lucasfilm or Disney to communicate that, or the actors who.
Sure.
It's just bizarre to me that actors would not behave in concert with a studio or take cues from a studio. Studio didn't give cues, by the way.
Sure.
And we had this difficulty, which, by the way, started as minor, but then when Lucasfilm waged war, which is not listening to their own Yoda dude.
Sure.
Wars not make one great.
Yeah. Right.
They waged war, which inflamed. Confirmation bias was hit,
Yep.
and suddenly there's a kind of civil war in the Star Wars fandom going on, which was really, I think, deeply unfortunate and cost money.
Sure.
Because that impacts your licensing, your merchandising, the global goodwill, mass media coverage, and so forth. It's not conducive, and of course, you have to backpedal a little bit with the third film, which I thought was unfortunate because it did not it played too safely with the incredible concepts of the second film.
Sure. Felt like they tried to overcorrect, maybe. Like they went back into the other ditch, right?
There you go. A little bit.
Yeah. So
the only thing I hated, I liked it, but the only thing I hated was super minor. But there may be some people out there. Let me know, people, if you agree with me. Me and my daughter hated that Finn ended up in the friend zone at the end. He got a hug. What the heck was all of that for?
Yeah.
And I was rooting for the brother, man. Come on.
That's it.
And they let me down with that one. But that's just my immature rant.
That's it.
There was that is actually a fault of narrative design. Which, if you want to see fantastic narrative design, look at those Marvel Cinematic Universe movies where they're thinking for each movie, even the most minor detail has some structural impact on the rest of the work. It's like a fractal kind of narrative design. And of course, that wasn't the case. And then you get these kinds of dissatisfactions, like with Finn.
So, in regards to the collective journey, I think it's such an interesting concept. I'm of the mindset that, as a Star Wars fan, that if you let the audience and the fan base crowdsource the next Star Wars film, it would be terrible, right? I think if like giving fans complete control, probably not the right way. But you got to find some balance, right, between having them feel heard, having them feel, it's almost like it's an interesting relationship. It's like having a spouse, right, and figuring out a way forward. One of the questions that I have for you, is just to get your take on when it comes to the collective journey, is I don't think you're saying, or maybe I just ask, are you saying that when we're talking about the nuanced storytelling of good versus evil, you're not necessarily uh, proposing that there isn't good versus evil, just that we need to converse around that in a more nuanced fashion, right?
Correct. The storytellers should have the right to designate whatever character, whatever it is that they feel.
Yeah.
I'm a huge proponent of storytellers as artists, and
Right.
you're absolutely right. We can't kind of mass generate great stories. Storytelling by committee, not so good. Um,
Yeah.
uh, However, if you take the systemic approach, then your empathy for all the characters is felt because you understand that the evil that's being perpetrated is being perpetrated because there is a flaw in the system.
Sure.
That there is a significant a societal problem or family dynamic problem, that there are underlying reasons why this dynamic and the relationship between these sets of characters is being the way that it's being. And so what happens is it becomes less about the hero destroying the evil villain,
Yeah.
and leaving behind a system that has not changed, right?
Sure.
Because in Hero's Journey, think about all the movies you've ever seen. The bad guy gets it at the end, but the societal and systemic issues that produce that bad guy have not even been dinged.
Yeah.
You know,
So Thanos, let me ask you
we
about Thanos, because I think Thanos
sure.
is a really interesting nuance to that question. One of the in some of my classes, we talk about character alignment, old D&D character alignment, right?
Sure.
And we talked about what characters are in what box. And one of the things that there's some easy ones, right? Superman, that's an easy one. Gandalf, that's an easy one, right? Whenever I throw out where's Thanos, where would you put Thanos? It's fascinating how about third of the class will put him, neutral evil, and but a third of the class, at least every single time, make the argument that that he's neutral good, and or that he's chaotic good, and that I think is such. And then there's a third, like, that goes back and forth, right? But the fact that, I mean, we look at what Thanos does. I mean, Thanos literally is creating mass genocide, and but the nuance is that he believes he's the hero of his own story. He believes that he's doing it for the good of everybody else, and so you have these altruistic motivations. Seemingly from his perspective, and according to some people, that then makes the action good. What do you think? I mean, do we position Thanos as evil based on the action, or do we nuance it a little bit just simply based on his perspective of his motivation, according in like through a collective journey lens? What's your take?
Sure. It's funny in our kind of mapping of the mega story of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We see the whole thing as very, very similar to the Japanese rumination about atomic power and the role of their society after the Second World War. and you can see in all those giant monster movies this kind of hand wringing. Well, here is the incarnation of our greatest fear. Here is the incarnation in Godzilla, the destructive force of the unleashing of the atom. And we're grappling with it because we know that scientifically, atomic power can be quite a boon to us, and so Godzilla can be good. Godzilla can be our hero, but and then it kind of shifts in waves over the course of decades. Marvel, the MCU, is a response to 9/11. And so the role of Thanos really is almost like this kind of outside amplifier over the contentions of Tony Stark. Sure. So really, all that Thanos is showing us is the shadow side of Stark.
Sure.
Someone who is willing to forego freedom in order to put the world in a cage, to protect it, and use all of these kind of technological wonders to hyper monitor us and do all the things that essentially puts us under lock and key, and of course, due to flaws in that system, wind up destroying us, sure, like Ultron and that sort of thing. And here Thanos is writ large, a projection of Tony, and so his role is vital because we need to see where it's all going to go, where it could all go, with under the auspices of doing something good. Terrible things. Sokovia happens. Half the universe could be wiped out in a wink. What does that even mean to us? We don't see that happen. We don't need to see it happen because we know that this conflict between Stark and Steve Rogers could very well result in the extermination of the human race, or it'd be devastating. And so your assignation of good or evil on Thanos is almost beside the point, because as long as he's taking that position within the systemic of the collective journey narrative that's going on over the course of a dozen or so movies, we're good to go.
Yeah. Well, just officially, just for my classes, because I'm going to show them this video. What box would you put Thanos in? What would the character alignment be for Thanos in D&D terms?
Thanos does not lie, and he never does. He's lawful evil.
I love it. Okay. Perfect. Okay, cool. That's gonna squash a lot of debate. I think that's good.
I love Thanos. He was probably my favorite antagonist because the layers, there was he emoted. It was really cool, and he was a strong, like, kick-ass type of guy. I loved him.
Great.
And yet a little bit mellow. A little bit. Yeah. I loved his mellowness.
Yeah.
There was dimension. I love that. Yeah. I have a question though, Jeff, and this helps the small guy out there. I'm a big fan of the David versus Goliath, and I want our audiences at all times to grow. And we have someone as respected as you on here, so I want to ask you like an advice type question. My background, as you can see here, are my 7 kids. And I know there's people out there saying, how do I create a fan base when I don't have money? I have a project. And, my simple advice is do like me, go out and have 7 kids. You got a built-in fan base. Have grandkids, right? But maybe someone just has a hard time dating. They're too shy. So that may not be practical, Jeff. But in all seriousness though, what would you tell the small guy, the independent guy who people aren't coming to them giving them Ultraman. People aren't coming to them, giving them Avatar. And at one point, you started small. No one knew you, what have you. So, there may be some key components or some key ingredients. Like with our brand of Transmedia called Superstory, we talk about things like feeding the beast, which we can go into later, crosstalk, getting talking to each other, creating hierarchies and statuses. But what are the things that Jeff would say to an audience to say, here's how you can get some fans involved. Here's some simple things you can do to start and then grow from there.
Because you're doing coaching now, right? I mean, that's one which is super cool. So this speaks exactly to, I'm presuming, the advice that you give your coach.
It is exactly the type of advice that I give. You'll give people ways to reach me if they want that kind of service. I'm glad to provide it.
So dangle a little carrot in front of them. Give them a little carrot real quick.
In this particular case, I'll talk about myself because your point is really well taken. I am the poster child for starting small. And really, it is initially all about your personal super story, and doing your best to crystallize that narrative. We start out with preconceived notions about how the world works. Those notions are fed to us by parents, teachers, friends, and the media. And it is, I have to tell you, it's not necessarily true. The reality that we are raised in is a cage. It is based on our perceptions of things and based on experiences that are limited because we're not super wealthy, hyper connected entertainment guys, right? So I think one of the big differences for me, someone coming out of I'm from the lower class, not the middle class. I'm way down there, but this thought in my head about how story can be told, this thing that I loved, being able to move from one medium to the next and still enjoy things, and have it be consistent, be validated for my love for this narrative. That was pure in me from fairly young, right? So I was in college thinking about this and thinking about how we can manifest this, right? And in doing so, I had no wherewithal. I couldn't even shoot a little independent movie in the 1980s. So I wrote about it based on my experiences playing games, role-playing games and stuff like that, right? How do you create a story world for your Dungeons and Dragons campaign? How do you make that experience more immersive, more interactive for your players, right? Because I was doing that, and I had generated a fan base of 5. But boy, did they love my game, right? They love my game, and I love them for loving my game. Can I have 7? Can I have 10, 15, 20 people? And every time I attempted to do that, they'd come. So I started writing about it. So the key is to earn fans by placing yourself in a situation where they can see you, and then having something to say. Have something to say that's interesting and engaging and validates their participation.
That's awesome.
We are in a world right now where that is immediately available free of charge. You can set up an outpost on Facebook or a blog or a website that contains your short stories and so forth. You can post on Webtoon with your comics and so forth, and or DeviantArt, and suddenly there are people who show up, who like it, who you can charge with bringing more people, and building a base of operations. Now, flipping the script a little bit, as a person in the entertainment industry, when I'm looking for people I want to work with, new talent, you know what I do? I talk to my friends and say, who's up and coming, who's cool, whose work should I look at? And they'll mention a name, right? But they won't send me their resume. And frankly, I don't want to see somebody's resume.
Sure.
Resumes are yesterday. I say, send me a link. Okay. And I want two links. I want one link to their portfolio, whatever work it is that they were doing, or samples of it and things like that. I don't want to talk to the person. Mm. I want to see their portfolio. And then I want a link to their social media. Mm. Because I want to see what kind of person this is. Because if this person is a pain in the ass, right, I don't want to work with them. I don't care how talented they are. Right. Life is too short. So I want to see whether this person's a goofball, whether this person can finish stuff. Sure. Because finishing is key. Yes. I don't care how brilliant you are. If you can't finish it, I'm not interested in you. Right? Preach it, Jeff. Preach it. So I want to see what, and I want to look at their following. Who's interested in this person? I like it. And believe it or not, it's not how many people, right? It's whether the people who are following you love you, whether the people who are following you are really interested in what you have to say and can't wait for the next thing that you say, right? I have in all maybe 25, 30,000 followers. But if you look at them, they're brilliant. They're industry professionals, or they're people who truly love what it is that I do and what it is that I talk about, and I engage with them. And that's all anyone needs to know. I'm hired, right? That's what I'm going to do with you. So does that make some kind of sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Travis,
some great nuggets in there, and I appreciate that. It's just good for people are starving, not just for entertainment, but they're starving for, what's that little way out. And sometimes the advice that people get is not what they expect. There was something you mentioned in building fandom and going in and writing about every single character and creating that book with the leather bound. What I heard right there is, wow, this whole super story transmedia thing is a lot of work. So you have to be passionate, and sometimes people don't want to hear that. They're looking for the quick way. So you've given some really great nuggets, and I've been able to pull out of that. I'm hoping our audience was able to pull out things as well.
Absolutely. I got one more question for you, Jeff, then we're going to let you go because we're about an hour. So we always do a mailbag at the end of our show, and typically we have a video mailbag, but I just got I got an email question for you from one of my students at the Los Angeles Film School. They say, Jeff, this is from Sierra. Jeff, Professor Howard makes us read your article, the 10 Commandments on 21st Century Franchising. My question is there a practical difference between transmediating story worlds for big sci-fi projects like Avatar and small real world stuff set in a neighborhood or a town or a city? So
great question.
Question of scale, right? And that's something I get all the time is, do the same story world principles apply? Do you approach it if you're just doing something small as, the bigger stuff that you're dealing with? What do you think?
Well, we've dealt with this a lot. The clients on our website tend to be the big guns, but we've dealt with documentary films and small independent films and content that isn't even movies. They're like brands and things like that. So this process is scalable. Those 10 commandments were predominantly written for big studio properties, but so much of it applies when you scale it. when you scale it down, and it all really starts with the essence, the central messaging. This is the thing that makes or breaks any transmedia implementation. What is it that you have to say? And do you understand the nature of the platforms on which you're saying them? Because if you're treating an interactive platform like just another television screen, you're not using that platform to the best of its ability.
Sure.
Look at Quibi,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Quibi is just a network. It's like a cable channel.
Yeah.
And yet I'm supposed to enjoy Quibi on my telephone, on my mobile hypercomputer thing. Yeah. It doesn't do anything that my phone is capable of giving to me.
Right.
And so my interaction with that content, I can't even project it onto my television.
Right.
So so I'm immediately bored with that, and I'm moving on.
Sure.
And so that is not conducive to transmedia storytelling. And so that essence and the understanding of the platforms are all you really need to start off. The bigger picture stuff is throw those ingredients into your taste.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff. It's been an awesome hour. I feel like we could go 4, but I really appreciate you and your time and your wisdom, and really hope that we have another chance to talk again soon. Been a
Sure.
wealth of information.
Let me give you ways to reach out to me for you and your audience. You have a special audience. They're people who either are practicing transmedia storytelling or aspire to with these big story worlds. So perhaps I can help somewhere along the way. My Twitter is @Jeff_Gomez. You can reach me in LinkedIn. It's pretty easy to find me there, Jeff Gomez. Facebook is Facebook/Transmedia, but again, Jeff Gomez, type it in and you find me. And slrlifestory.com is my coaching service where I meet weekly. I have a little curriculum and work with people to help them level up in terms of breaking into the entertainment industry or doing better in the entertainment industry. And you can go to slrlifestory.com. During the pandemic, we have all lowered our prices significantly so that we can speak with more kind of people who are still outside of the entertainment industry and might not be able to afford the giant prices that are on that website. So feel free to email me directly if that's your interest, jeff@starlightrunner.com. Do not send me your screenplays or your 5 gigabyte story worlds.
Yeah.
I am not allowed to look at them.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it.
Hey, Jeff, have you heard anything in the rumblings about remember the old karate flicks like Shaolin and Wu-Tang? And I was a huge fan of that as a kid.
As was I.
Early 80s. And it's disappeared. And maybe I'm just not searching enough, but as a fan, I wish someone would create, like when Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, that came back out, I took my dad, he fell asleep, but I'm like, dude, come on, what the heck? You've fallen asleep in a movie? But I was just wondering if you had heard anything, because you bringing back the Ultraman, that has an older audience, and I used to get into that stuff. So I was a real big karate guy. I'm like, I wonder if they're gonna do something for those fans like myself and bring stuff back.
We've seen rumblings. I used to go to the quadruple features of martial arts films in kung fu movies in Times Square. I loved them. Because they had these rich mythologies and in some cases were interconnected and Shaolin was something that you saw in several movies, Wu-Tang, all that sort of thing. one of the heartbreakers for us was an extended flirtation with the Shaw brothers. Do you know the Shaw brothers? Some wonderful kung fu movies from China, and we talked to them a long time about bringing back all of those properties and creating an interconnected universe, and we couldn't make the numbers work, unfortunately. And believe me, we lowered the price because I wanted to be involved, but they just couldn't. It was going to be a lot of work, a lot, and we couldn't make it work. But we see a kung fu series on its way back to television. Bruce Lee's estate is developing lots of new content, and we're seeing experiments with superhero and martial arts worlds in China and Southeast Asia.
Nice.
That I think will eventually find their way here. So fingers crossed.
I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Everybody get in touch with Jeff. Good man to follow, good man to connect with. We'll talk
Brad, Houston, Travis, thank you so much. This was tremendous. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us to your home.
You got it.